Comparative analysis brought to you by Roger Peters and Meg Atwater-Singer, who is not present today. Roger Peters is the Assistant Director of Library and Information Services at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He has been a resource sharing practitioner since he was a student worker beginning in 2009. He actively participates in the Policy Fulfillment Steering Committee and is the current chair of the Alley Resource Sharing Committee. Meg Atwater-Singer is the Access Services Librarian at the University of Evansville. In this capacity, she oversees the information desk, circulation, reserves, interlibrary loan, the physical collections, security, social media, and the website. Meg is active in Indiana statewide research sharing initiatives and has presented conference sessions on assessing interlibrary loan usage, comparing interlibrary loan systems, and recently authored a paper on the copyright practices of Indiana academic libraries. So I give it to Roger.
Yes, so Meg is not here, as Holly mentioned. So just a quick kind of background on this. This is very much the high school project, like a group project where one person does all the work and then somebody else shows up and takes credit for it. Because I think I mentioned in the intro earlier, we were thinking about doing this in like one of our informal chats, but we decided to make it a presentation because it's hard to find people who use all these different systems and get them all together on the same Zoom at the same time across time zones. So instead, what we did was we interviewed people and put together a slideshow. So Meg said, I'll do that because years ago, when she was trying to make a decision on a good library system or interlibrary loan system for her library, she did all this research. So she said, I can kind of update my notes, we can interview some people, and I'll put together the slides if someone else can present it. And so I said, okay, I'll present it. I did sit in on some of those interviews that she conducted. And so today we'll get the results of that work that she did. I do want to preface this by saying, of course, that every library is different. So what works for one library may not work for your library, but just kind of looking at what are some of the options out there. Because I find that many of us in our institutions, when we become the person who does the interlibrary loans, we're using just the system we've inherited and may not know that there are other options out there. Or in my case, when I took over managing our interlibrary loans, a lot of our automations were things that were set up back in like the late 90s, and no one's touched them ever since. So working through those automations, especially now with the automated request manager. And so we made it onto Tony's slide earlier based on some of that work and improving those lender strings instead of using something from 20 years ago. So all that being said, then we'll get into talking about the different systems. So, and again, these are Meg's slides. So I'm going to do my best to represent what she's put together. But, you know, the goal is just identifying the ILL software and systems that are out there on the market. So one of the ones we're talking about, I'd never heard of until we started working on this presentation together. And then we're just talking to practitioners about their experiences. You know, what's working good for this library, what's working for this library. So let's see, does this work? Yes.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, you're good.
Yeah, so the systems we're looking at then, Clio, this is the one I'd never heard of. Tapasa is one of the others. Of course, World Share Interlibrary Loan, or WSILL. If you're participating in OCLC resource sharing, you've got this. Tapasa would be an add-on for that. Iliad's another option. And then Project Reshare and Rapido are the other ones we looked at. We didn't look at Rapid ILL, and I realized probably way too late that we probably should have talked to someone about Rapid ILL, but that's another option that's out there. We do have, oh, zoomed in. What is that? Cool. Okay, let's try that. There we go. So these are the people that we talked to using these different systems. So Kirsten Williams at the University of Southern Indiana. She preceded me as the chair of the Ollie Resource Sharing Committee, so it's nice to touch base with her again. I don't know how to pronounce this next name. Lori Legge, I think, from George Fox University, uses Clio and Rapid ILL. Jennifer Young at Eastern Tennessee State University with just talking about Rapido. Cecilia Williams, they use Clio and World Share Interlibrary Loan. David Frank at Seton Hall, they use Project Reshare and Iliad. My library, we are a WorldShare interlibrary loan library with no add-ons. And then Meg Atwater Singer uses Tapasa at the University of Evansville. So a quick overview of each of these systems, just kind of going through what they are. WorldShare ILL, as I mentioned, this is if you're using OCLC resource sharing, this is what you've got. If you are using Iliad in addition to that, you can still log into WorldShare ILL and see your turnaround times and all that good stuff. It uses WorldCat as its bibliographic universe. So the libraries that have their holdings in WorldCat, that's what you see. And then, of course, the other libraries that are participating in OCLC resource sharing, those are your potential lenders. If they have a holding on a specific bibliographic record. And you can go to OCLC's website to learn more about that. A potential kind of add-on would be Iliad. So this is a third-party software. I'm always confused. I'm actually glad, Mark, that you're in the room because Iliad is Atlas Systems.
Yes.
But it's also like really closely tied together with OCLC. I don't understand the relationship.
An agreement. We are marketing, support, everything for Iliad and the Atlas Systems folks continue to do development.
Gotcha.
It's a management system on top of WorldShare.
Right. Yes. So it is based on OCLC's resource sharing model. So it's also using WorldCat for its bibliographic universe. The bullet point there about the lenders can charge fees, this was something we kind of discovered as we were going through. Of course, we talked this morning a lot about Elvis and film. So, there are free lenders out there. My library, for example, doesn't charge for loaning, but it is possible for libraries to charge fees. So that's where that IFM comes in. And of course, you can find out more about Iliad on their website. Tapasa is the other option. Tapasa is OCLC's product. Whenever I look at it, it looks like WorldShare ILL with a lot of bonus features that are added on. So things like my patrons don't get text messages, but if you've got Tapasa, you can get text message updates about stuff. So it's an add-on. So OCLC and WorldCat for the bibliographic universe. It's possible to charge fees, all those things. Both Iliad and Tapasa, they give you a lot of options for automation. And so that's what that add-on would be for. Clio is the one I'd never heard of. I didn't know it existed, but Meg used to use Clio and had moved to a different system, but there are still libraries that really like Clio and are still using it. So it's developed by Clio Software. ClioSoftware.com is their website. Although I'll tell you, there's not a lot there. It's basically just like one page that's like, talk to our marketing people. Yeah. It is also kind of an add-on for OCLC resource sharing. So WorldCat is their bibliographic database, although we did find one library that was using it without OCLC, which was kind of a shock to us. But again, it's possible for lenders to charge fees because it's OCLC resource sharing, really. Rapido is a totally different option. So this is Ex Libris Clarivate. It's based on the Alma ILLs, although very recently, they've released this as a standalone kind of option. So you can just subscribe to Rapido if you want to. Before you had to be an Alma to use it. Rapido has its central discovery index. So instead of all of WorldCat being your bibliographic universe, it's this index. So it's really the other Rapido libraries. So it's a much smaller world, but for some libraries, they find that everything they need is in that world. So this option works for them. The other interesting thing that's about Rapido is there's no fees for lending or borrowing. So of course you pay your license to use Rapido, but every library that's in there is a free lender in terms of you're not paying for individual loans, and you're not looking at like, there's no max cost because for everyone it's just 0. So Ex Libris, their website, you can find information about it. That's a really long URL, so I would say just Google it. And you'll find it. I didn't do QR codes. I should have done QR codes. You're right. Everybody knows that it's a QR code nowadays. Yes, so that's Rapido, and then the last one we looked at was Project Reshare. Project Reshare is kind of like the new kid on the block. Everyone's kind of watching it, I think, looking at their development. It's an open access solution, and it's really kind of based off Folio. It's a lot of the same code structure. If you ever see screenshots of Folio next to screenshots of Reshare, they look exactly the same. So it's very similar user interface. Members pay dues to use Project Reshare. It's based on their lender level and their library type, which they have lots of different tiers of lender levels. So like if you just want to do borrowing and sharing, borrowing and lending, that's one level. But if you want to be active in development, that's another level, all of that kind of stuff. They have a shared inventory of library holdings. So it's very much like Rapido's central discovery index. So Reshare libraries share with other Reshare libraries. So again, it's a smaller world, but it might be just what you need. Or you might use it for one thing and do something else for others. So Reshare, for example, right now only does returnables. They're working on Reshare Digital that would introduce non-returnables, but right now it's just books. So I know Palsy, I think, uses Reshare for their sort of consortial borrowing among themselves, but you can't do non-returnables, not yet. So if you want non-returnables, you still at this point have to have something else, like OCLC or Rapido or something like that. Okay, so those are the systems, and looking at the various people we talked to and what's working for them. So we talked to Seton Hall University about Project Reshare. So this is a Palsy library, and don't ask me what Palsy. Oh, that's it. Partnership for Academic Library Collaboration and Innovation. It used to be like Pennsylvania, but now they've expanded beyond just Pennsylvania. So they have the same letters, but it means different stuff. That's why I can never remember it. But they've got 52 colleges and universities in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and West Virginia. And so they have this program they call Easy Borrow. So it's the shared index of consortium library holdings, a shared discovery layer that they use. And so patrons are able to request unmediated from other items from within this consortium. My library is a member of PALMI, so we have a similar kind of thing. We call it PalShare, but for us, it's just group circulation in WorldShare Management Services, WMS. So they're doing the same kind of thing with Project Reshare because they're not all in the same ILS. They have a variation of ILSs. So they use Reshare to do this. So this is what Seton Hall has for consortial borrowing. And then they also have Iliad. So they use Reshare for returnables from Easy Borrowing, and then Iliad for their copy requests and anything that's unfilled in Easy Borrow. So if they have a returnable, a book that they can't get from within Palsy, then they go out to Iliad for that, which again is OCLC resource sharing. What's interesting, and this is kind of the thing for me that makes me frown at this setup, is they have 3 patron portals. So their patrons can log into Easy Borrow and see what they've borrowed through Easy Borrow. Then they've got an Iliad portal, and then this is a WMS school, so then they've also got their library account in WMS. I think that's too many places for patrons to log in, but they're making it work. Like I said, every library is different, so you've got lots of options for instructing patrons on how to use things. So that's their setup. Next, we talked to Eastern Tennessee State University about using Rapido. So they are an Alma library, and they use Primo for their discovery layer. They use this central discovery index. So that's all based in Rapido's kind of universe. And they use this for all borrowing and lending. So they don't have anything else. I think do I have another slide on them? Yeah, I'll talk about that in a sec. They mostly do unmediated, but things kick back to them if it's a textbook. So a lot of academic libraries don't do interlibrary loans for textbooks for courses. They tell the students like, no, you need the textbook. And a lot of times the textbooks, if it's an ILL, it's going to be due before the semester is over. So just get the textbook. Purchase requests and then copyright compliance. So their system helps them manage copyright compliance. And then they only have the one patron portal because this Rapido setup works in conjunction with their ILS. So it's just one patron portal. So what they did, they had Rapid ILL, which is Ex Libris Clarivate. They were using WorldShare ILL and they had Iliad. So they canceled all that. They've got nothing from OCLC anymore. They're just using Rapido. But that means if they can't fill something in Rapido, they're filling out ALA form, which is a bigger barrier for some people than for other people. But that's the option. If you're going to go away from OCLC for any reason and you want something from another library that you can't get in your universe, the ALA form is what you end up doing. So that is Eastern Tennessee State University. The University of Evansville, they use TAPASA. So this is Meg's institution. They have a lot of unmediated requests. Anything from their faculty, I think, just goes straight through. Their undergraduates, it's unmediated for copies, and then I think mediated for books, which is kind of fun because that's like the opposite of my institution. I need water. All of our like book borrowing requests pretty much go unmediated. It kicks back to us if it's something we hold or if it's like a duplicate request, things like that. But for the most part, we don't mediate those, but we mediate a lot of the copy requests. They do the opposite. But they want to check if it's a textbook. So that's, I think, one of the big reasons they're mediating those book requests. Automatically receive or deliver copies from proven senders. So this is getting at some of that automation. So at my institution, and I'm jumping the gun here, but when another library fills a copy request, so we request, a chapter out of a book or something like that, they send it to us through Article Exchange. I have to go in to the request and click the button to email that thing to my patron. Usually we review it, make sure it's complete, make sure it's actually what we asked for. But in TAPASA, you can set up a proven senders list. So if we request stuff from IU all the time and they're really good at it, and they always give us exactly what we asked for, you can set them up as a proven sender so that if they send a copy, it just goes straight to the patron without staff having to do anything about it. I also know in terms of academics, this can be a big deal based on your discipline. My institution, it's a theological seminary, which is kind of a subset of the humanities. So we do a lot more book than articles. But if you are at an institution where you're focused on the hard sciences, where the article rules the day, because if it's more than 5 years old, it's too old. You get a lot of article requests. Having to email each of those to the students manually could be pretty time intensive. So this sort of automation really goes a long way. They check out the books to their patrons through Alma with their INSIP integration. So Alma's their ILS. So they have two patron portals, TAPASA for students to manage their interlibrary loan requests, and then their Alma portal for their regular circulation, things like that. So again, two patron portals. Now, the University of Southern Indiana, on the other hand, uses Iliad. They use this for all their borrowing and lending requests. And from what I know about Iliad, I would describe Iliad as like the wrecking ball. Like it can automate like everything. And then TAPASA has a lot of automations, but it's not quite the level Iliad is. And then if you don't want all that stuff, you use like Clio's kind of like Iliad Light, something like that. But the University of Southern Indiana, they don't do any unmediated requests, which shocked me because like that's part of the reason for the automation. But the reason they do no unmediated requests is because they've got lots of incomplete or incorrect citations. So I think some of that has to do with instruction for your patrons, but also she said a lot of it has to do with their databases and the way things are set up. So maybe there's some improvement that could be made there to take advantage of the automation. But they do automatically receive and deliver copies from the proven senders. So like Tapasa, you can do this sort of proven senders thing. So once they send out the request, when it comes in, then they have that automation for things that are coming in. And they also have two patron portals, Iliad for their interlibrary loans, and then they use Tind ILS, which is one of those projects that was a spinoff from Stern. I've never heard of Tind until we talked to the University of Southern Indiana. But that's they have Tind institutional repository, and now they have an integrated library system. It's really interesting. George Fox University, they use Clio and Rapid ILL. So this was the one that was kind of surprising. They don't have an OCLC resource sharing subscription, but they're still using Clio. They're in the Orbis Cascade consortium. So that provides the majority of their loans. And what their setup they have is integrated with Alma Primo. They use Clio and Rapid ILL for their copy requests. So they use Clio for managing all the copy requests. And then I think they use, I don't remember the details. I should have got more notes from Meg. But I don't know, it's an interesting setup. They only mediate incomplete copy requests or the things that are unfilled in Rapid ILL though. So they are using some more of that information or automation. But again, they've got two patron portals, Clio and Primo. Okay. Mercer University, they use Clio to manage borrowing for initial processing. They check if it's owned, if it's a duplicate, and then they send it to WSILL to build the lending string and actually order. So I thought this one was interesting because they do part of the processing in Clio and part of the processing in WorldShare Interlibrary Loan. You do all their lending in just WorldShare Interlibrary Loan. They don't use Clio for any of the lending. It's just for some of the borrowing automations. But they don't use automations. I don't know, but they've got Alma and ZIP. So again, two patron portals, Primo and Clio. This is my institution, Concordia Theological Seminary. We do all of our book borrowing as unmediated unless it kicks back as a duplicate request or something we already own, things like that. We do some unmediated stuff for articles. So that new patron form that we heard about this morning is what's finally enabled us to do unmediated article requests, because if our students use that to put in their copy requests, for the most part, it just goes through an automated request manager builds our lender strings. If they can't find enough lenders, things like that, then we get involved with those mediated copy requests, or sometimes we get professors or students, they just say, hey, can you get me this thing? And they send us something. So that's obviously very mediated because they're not using the request form. We're a WMS library, so WorldShare Management Services. So an OCLC ILS, we have our circulation integration turned on. So our patrons are able to check out the interlibrary loans when they come in. When it comes in, it makes a temporary item, and that temporary item gets checked out to the patron. So it's all very seamless. Received copy requests must be manually sent to patrons. So we don't have any automations in terms of what we do with the stuff once it comes in. It comes in through article exchange. We get an alert. We look at it, make sure it looks good. hit email doc to patron and send the email, and then they can retrieve it from Article Exchange. But we only have one patron portal, and that's the one in WMS. So I like that there's only one, but there are pros and cons. The major con being that our patrons can't manage their interlibrary loans or really see them at all until they arrive. So there's no way for them to look at the request as it's in transit. They used to be able to see those things in their requests queue because it would make the temporary item once they place the request, but they changed the way it works recently, and now the temporary item isn't created until the item is received. That's nice for us librarians because if a request gets canceled, we don't have to go into the circulation module and delete the hold. But it's less useful for the patrons because they don't see the request until it arrives. But there's only one place for them to log in, which I really like. All right. So those are all the institutions we talked to. The analysis criteria, I think this is based on when Meg was still trying to make a decision on what system she wanted to go with. So looking at cost, technical support, how are the requests managed? Are there reporting functions? And then strengths and weaknesses of each system. I can't really talk about cost today because a lot of that's based on full-time equivalent for academics, things like that. Volume, how much lending and requesting are you doing, or some other metrics. And the vendors don't really like just share this information, right? Like I can't go to Clio's website and they're like, it's this much per year, and then go to Alma's website and get, so you got to work with the vendors. So I can't tell you relative costs and things like that. So if you're interested, talk to the vendors. We've got one right here. I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to you if you want to upgrade to PASA or something like that. But all the systems, they enable patron data loads. There's patron authentication so that users can manage their stuff. All of these systems have some kind of reporting, various levels of that. And then, of course, there's always support from the product team and the greater resource sharing community. That's one of the reasons I like being on like the resource sharing committee in Aldi or working with our fulfillment group in Palmy, because if I've got a question, there's always like 3 other people who have had the same question before and can tell me how to fix it. And at this point now, I'm getting to where I'm answering a lot of those questions for other people. And so it's fun. We work together as a resource sharing community all the time. So that's part of that support that's built in, no matter which system you're using. These all have some sort of unmediated borrowing possible. So WorldShare ILL, Iliad to PASA, Reshare, and Rapido. Clio's not on this list in terms of unmediated borrowing. So I think there's always some sort of mediation that happens there. You can get custom reports for Iliad to PASA and Rapido. For WorldShare ILL, I just go to the stats site and there's a bunch of reports. And they all meet my needs, so I don't know. Your needs might be different though. So if you really need some robust reporting, these are options for you. And then going back to this fees for borrowing, it's possible for lenders to charge in WorldShare, ILL, Iliad to PASA, Clio, but Rapido and Reshare, there's no charge per loan on any of those. And that's actually the end of the slideshow. So Meg's contact information is there. If you want to reach out to her, she's done a lot of work on this. I wasn't able to make it to all the interviews, but Meg definitely was. But I might know the answers to some questions. So if you have any questions, you can reach out. But does anyone in the room or on Zoom have questions for now? Hopefully I can answer them. Yeah.
I would just say for Iliad, you have to do things in a very certain order. Like things have to be in certain queues. And if you don't do it in that specific order, then it gets upset. And so I just was wondering in the other systems if there are also little quirks that if you don't do something that exact way, then it says, oh, there's a problem.
Yeah, that's a good question. The only one of these systems that I have direct experience with is WorldShare Interlibrary Loan. But it's very similar to Tapasa, so I've seen a lot of those workflows. From what I've heard from Iliad users, a lot of times the thing that they really like about Iliad is the queues. Like I've heard the queues, it can be very powerful. You can set up all these different queues. But I think some of the other systems like Tapasa or WorldShare Interlibrary Loan, I don't know about Rapido, but I think they're probably more forgiving in terms of the workflow like that. So I know for us adding things to the print queue, we print out book straps that OCLC generates. And if I forget to check the book strap box, I can always go back into the loan and there's a drop down that I can use to add that to the print queue. So it's more forgiving in that way, but I don't know enough about the queues and Iliad to know if that's a huge pro or con. So other Iliad users might be able to answer that. Or there's plenty of librarians that were on Iliad that moved to Tapasa. I don't know if any of them are here today. But I know they're out there.
Boy, so
Hmm? Oh.
Like for example, in Iliad, there's a queue that's called in stacks searching, but then there's also awaiting stack searching, and there's in D stack searching, and it's just very specific.
That makes sense. Holly, you're used Iliad, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't gonna talk about Iliad though, unless you had something specific to ask me.
No, go ahead. What do you got?
What is your favorite thing about the system you use and the thing that bugs you the most about the system you use?
That's a good question, but I don't know if I have an answer. I know I like WorldShare ILL, that vanilla version, because it's really simple. Like, I mean, you've got your borrowing requests you respond to, you've got your lending requests you fill. But I also understand that a lot of, when it comes to making the decisions, volume is a big part of that. So, you know, my institution, we're considered a large seminary, but we've only got about 350 FTE. So when you compare that to like an IU or something like that, where you've got lots of students, which translates to lots more volume, you might need a lot more of those automations that you have in the other systems. So where was I going with that? I don't know. Sometimes I wish we had more of the automations, but at the same time, our volume is low enough that we're able to live without them. And so the system we have works for us.
What is your volume? Vague number.
In terms of lending requests, we're talking like on a heavy day, it would be like 10 loans and like 15 copies. And then borrowing, you know, a lot of times we get just a handful of incoming things per day in terms of returnables. And then non-returnables, that really depends on where we are this semester. but still not more than like 10 a day. So it's not a ton. Like, so when we look at annually, it's 3 digits, right? So for a lot of your bigger schools, we're talking like 4 or 5 digits annually. So I think that goes a long way in terms of what system are you looking at. If you've got a lot more volume, you are going to want a lot more automations. So then you're looking at something like Tapata, something like Iliad. You've also got to think about your bibliographic universe and where you're getting stuff from. So for us, like looking at something like Rapido, it's not really attractive to us because when we look at our lending partners, a lot of those schools aren't in Rapido. We are mostly at my institution. It's schools in Indiana, and then outside of that, it's other theological institutions. So I look at the American Theological Library Association and those groups. A lot of them in the Chicago area. And a lot of those schools, they're in OCLC resource sharing. They're not in Rapido or Rapid ILL. They're not in Project Reshare. So I'm not going to go that route because I need OCLC bibliographic universe. But there's plenty of schools that, they look at Rapido and they see like, yeah, we get stuff from these people. So we can just use that system and that's going to get us like 90% of our loans. And then for the other 10%, we don't mind doing an ALA form. And then there's some schools that like the idea that we might someday have to fill out an ALA form is a deal breaker, right? So it depends on your institution and what works for you. Yeah.
The question from chat and then some comments.
Okay.
With any of these systems, is multiple copy ordering available? We are a small library, but have multiple book discussions. I can never find any kits available.
I've never actually, I don't think it is in any of these. It was possible in when we were doing certs with Autographics Share It was possible in there. It might be, do you know if it's possible in Iliad? You don't think so?
What was the question again?
If you can do multiple copies for like a reading group, like a book club.
You do that more.
You can?
Yes.
I've just never done it because we don't do
When
book.
you do the search, you can see how many copies you can go from 1 to 20. In on the bid record.
Yeah.
Record. It says grade 1 or grade 5 or
Really?
See?
Could you guys hear that on the chat or on the Zoom?
we actually call it our book club feature.
Okay, so he was talking about WorldShare ILL. When you find the bib record and you do create request, you can do from 1 to 20, is what he said.
No drop down. You just see one and you drop down.
That's interesting. I did not know that.
And we
But
call it book club.
in an academic library, it's one copy is usually all we need at a time. But so it's the book, you call it book club,
We call it the book club feature.
the book club feature. So it's there in WorldShare Interlibrary Loan. I also know it's in Autographics Share It. We didn't talk about that. Autographics only offers Share It to consortia, which is what we did in Indiana with CERCS until very recently. So, my library, I can't just say like, I want to use Autographics Share It instead. You really have to be part of a consortium for that. And any of us who were participating in CERCS, we know that system pretty well and what it's capable of. I know it had a book club feature as well, but now we're moving the borrowing libraries from CERCS to Indiana Share. And so that's that fun line on the graph we saw this morning.
So would Indiana Share be able to, instead of having to clone your book discussions?
Those requests are placed through the WorldCat interface and they come to our Iliad, so I don't think it.
Oh yeah, so Iliad does not do book club, and the Indiana State Library is using Iliad to manage Indiana Share. So no, you can't do it with Indiana Share.
You just have to clone the request over and over.
That's what, yeah. Okay, were there any other?
There's some comments.
Comments?
I can read them out for you.
Yeah.
I moved from Iliad to Topasa at my last job, and it was a good move for us to streamline processes. I am at a much bigger institution now, and the customization and automation of Iliad is much more useful to us. And I can go on to the next one.
Okay, so that's Lene.
Mhm.
They moved, so it was a good move from Iliad to Topasa at her previous institution, but at the bigger institution, the automation of Iliad is more useful.
Yeah, I can clarify that. I was at a much smaller school with
Yeah.
significantly less staff. And Tapasa was a lot easier to train students on or part-time employees. But we didn't have a lot of unusual requests. And I'm at Purdue now, and we had the quantity of requests coming in. Iliad is a much better move for us to have a lot of automations and a lot of add-ons like rapid ILL and things like that were much more beneficial to us. But it really depends on what your financing is and what your staffing load is and what you could do. But Tapasa was a good move for us at my last place. So there's some pros and cons to each.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so like the volume of requests was a big deal. Usability for student workers, things like that. Yeah, those are all really good considerations.
Another consideration might be whether you prefer a cloud-based portal for staff, isn't that right?
So cloud-based versus hosted. Yeah. Yeah, Tapasa is all cloud-based, just like WorldShare Interlibrary Alone. So I can log in from my house and look at the stuff. There's no problems. Iliad, I think you can self-host it or it can be hosted for you. But I think they're working on improving the access to Iliad online, right? Because in the past, I know during the pandemic, one of the Iliad librarians I know, like, had to use a VPN to be able to connect to Iliad to manage stuff from home. But I think that's the big thing that they're working on currently for Iliad.
Yeah, the last product that I believe they said they were working on making it cloud-based. I think we're gonna have the option, and you'd be able to do both.
Yeah. So that'll be like, if that was a con for Iliad, that's one of the improvements that's in the queue. So I think that'll be a big improvement for a lot of librarians. Yeah. Okay. Was there anything else on Zoom?
Yeah, there's another comments from Graham Frederick. Favorite about Iliad, the power of searching and reporting, and then an annoyance of Iliad, the inability to see manually what other libraries' e-journals holdings are. OCLC and Atlas are working to add this.
Oh yeah, yeah, the e-journal holdings. Yeah, and we talked about that this morning. So Tony mentioned for Iliad, if Iliad's using the automation, it'll be able to use that. What did you call it? Holdings.
Serial holdings updates.
Serial holdings update. Yeah. Okay, so improvements coming there.
It was reiterated that e-journal black hole is a huge downside of Iliad. It was a perk when I was on Tapasa. To clarify, Tapasa allows you to see these holdings.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so in WorldShare ILL and in Tapasa, if you're manually building a lender string, it shows you the column where it shows you the holdings. And not every library, like there might be a library there and that's blank, but for the most part you can see, like, oh, they've got these years to these years, and that's really great, or this year to present, things like that. Yeah, that's really great. Okay. Anything else from the group?
Has anybody set up WorldShare ILL from scratch? I was just wondering if any, or did you all inherit it? If you were.
Everybody inherited it that's using it?
Our library like set it up from scratch, but it's been so long ago that I don't remember what it was like.
I don't even know what would be involved in setting it up. I know you've got to get you got to make sure your holdings are in WorldCat. That's the most important thing, is making sure your holdings are up to date. That's one of the really nice things about World Share Management Services is that like our holdings, like it's already in WorldCat. Like if we've got an LHR, we've got a holding on it in WorldCat, or our knowledge base is managing that stuff for us. It's really nice. Are you telling me I've got 5 minutes left? Okay. But if there's nothing else, we can take a longer break.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah. Thank you.